Pembrokeshire coast in West Wales is an area of outstanding natural beauty and was once thought to be one of the safest places to live in the UK. But the decade between the mid-1980s and the mid-1990s would bring the shadows of armed robbery, rape and ultimately multiple murders to this idyllic area. These terrors would be brought by the actions of one evil man. But why did it take over 25 years to put him behind bars for good? John William Cooper was born in 1945 in Pembrokeshire, West Wales. Some people might consider him to be a career criminal because he started pretty early. Between the ages of 17 and 21, he was charged with numerous crimes. These included theft of a motor vehicle, assault of a police officer, numerous instances of being drunk and disorderly, and one assault occasioning actual bodily harm, or ABH as it's sometimes known. By 1978 he'd become a farm labourer, and things seemed to get better for him. He entered a competition in a local newspaper known as Spot the Ball. Very briefly, for those who are not familiar with that, you're presented with a photograph of a football or soccer match, but without the ball, and you're expected to place an X where you think the centre of the ball is. Cooper did this and he won £90,000, and that would be approximately £500,000 in today's money. He also won a car worth £4,000. He was a family man, and you might expect that he would use this substantial amount of money to set him and his family up for the future. But nothing could be further from the truth. His friends said that Cooper started drinking heavily and gambling. He spent most of his time either in the pub or the bookies. He got drunk a lot of the time and got into a lot of fights, and people were generally quite frightened of him. But he got through the money like water, and eventually it petered out. It was at this stage that his criminal activities resurfaced. He started to commit a string of burglaries in the area. This quickly escalated to armed robbery, usually using a sawn-off shotgun. On the 22nd of December 1985, the escalation of his crime went to a shocking level. He targeted a 3-storey farmhouse in the Scoverston Park area. This was the home of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas. On the night in question, Cooper waited until dark and then he broke into the farmhouse. Only Helen was at home to begin with, but Richard arrived home unexpectedly. Now, whether in panic at the arrival of Richard, we don't really know, but John Cooper shot them both in cold blood. He shot Richard in the head. He then tied Helen up and also shot her in the head. In an effort to cover up these murders, he then set fire to their farmhouse to try and burn the place down and get rid of any forensic evidence that would link him. Police would later say that when they arrived on the scene, it was a nightmare. A raging fire in the house, howling winds and torrential rain, and inside were the burnt bodies of Richard and Helen. Money quite obviously became a motivating factor for his crimes, and if we now fast forward to the 29th of June 1989, we come to his next heinous crime. Peter and Gwenda Dixon were a couple in their 50s who were holidaying in the area from Oxford, which was their home. They were camping and going on a series of long walks along the coastal paths. They were widely described, not least by family and friends, as wonderful people, the kind you would want as your neighbours. On this particular day, they were going for their final walk along the cliff paths. They wanted to let their tent dry out before taking it down because, again, it had been raining. And so they zipped up their tent and set off. But about half a mile from their campsite, they entered a wooded area. And from piecing together the evidence afterwards, the police think they were confronted by someone who again had a shotgun. We now know that this man was John Cooper. The motive for holding up these people was robbery. We know this because a bank card was taken and subsequently used, so in some way he must have extracted the PIN number for that bank card from Peter and Gwenda Dixon. But in spite of getting effectively what he wanted, the bank card, the money, again, Peter and Gwenda Dixon were murdered in cold blood. He shot them both in the face and then attempted to hide their bodies in a ravine nearby. And when they didn't return to the campsite, 2 days later their son Tim reported them missing to the police and a search ensued. Dog handlers went to search the clifftop paths where the couple were known to have walked, and with them was Chief Superintendent Don Evans. And after a short period of time, the dog handlers found the bodies of the two people, and Don Evans, when he got to where they were hidden, said that it was an absolutely horrendous sight. A second murder inquiry was instigated, but you have to note that this was 4 years after the farmhouse murder, so initially no connection was made. Now, I mentioned that in some way John Cooper must have got the PIN number for the cash point card out of the Dixons, because later it's known that he went to various cash points around the area and drew around about £300 in cash out. Because of this, police and people in the area were quite incredulous. Why had someone shot two people in cold blood just for such a small amount of cash? Everyone began to think that this just wasn't a robbery. They had a psychopath on their hands. At the time, police interviewed approximately 6,000 people in the local area. Roadblocks were set up, people were interviewed walking on the streets and also in their cars at these roadblocks. And one of the people that was questioned was John Cooper. Now, as part of the robbery, Peter Dixon's wedding ring had been stolen, and it was subsequently found that John Cooper had recently sold a wedding ring. When questioned, John Cooper stated that it was his wedding ring that he sold. It had become damaged and he just got rid of it for the value of the gold. This explanation was supported by members of his family, so police didn't think anything else of it and didn't make a connection between him and the murder of the Dixons. But despite his early convictions when he was a teenager, police didn't know the extent of John Cooper's violent nature. Two people who knew all too well the extent of John Cooper's savagery and sadistic nature were his long-suffering wife Pat and his son Andrew, who both bore the brunt of his anger and received regular beatings. His son Andrew actually changed his name from Adrian, the name given to him by his father. John Cooper gave him this name because he felt it was a girl's name and would lead to him being ridiculed and bullied at school. Andrew had been subjected to numerous assaults and beatings by John Cooper. He would describe his father as having an absolutely terrible temper. He described the fact that sometimes his father would come at him, frothing at the mouth almost, like some sort of enraged animal. One of the final beatings that he gave Andrew left him permanently scarred. It was so severe that it left him with screws in his spine. But he also said that outside of the home, everyone thought that his dad was an okay guy. He played darts down the pub, and although some people were a bit frightened of him, he was generally liked. But no one suspected John Cooper of the murders that I've just related. And so after 18 months, the inquiry was scaled down and it all went rather cold. And now we have to move forward in time again to March 1996. 5 local teenagers who were having a fun night out were walking through some fields in the Milford Haven area. It was just getting dark, and they would later describe that a man came towards them carrying a torch, and when he got closer they noticed he was also carrying a shotgun. This man proceeded to threaten the teenagers with his shotgun. He got them all to lie down on the floor and told them that if they moved he would shoot them. At one point he fired the shotgun in the air. He demanded money from the group. He then went on to sexually assault a 15-year-old girl within the group and rape the other girl, who was just 16 years old. Now, this must have been a terrifying experience for all of them, one that would scar them for the rest of their lives. And so let's look at what the police had. Within this decade, they had 2 violent murders where within each case, 2 people had been shot at close range with a shotgun. They also now had the assault on the 5 teenagers, and they had a string of some 30 burglaries, most of which followed the same pattern. Now, these burglaries and armed robberies were usually perpetrated on single females who were alone in the evening, usually by a single man carrying a sawn-off shotgun and wearing a balaclava. In November that same year, November 1996, the burglar or the armed robber was disturbed during the perpetration of one of his crimes, and he fled the scene. As he went, he discarded various items into the hedgerow. Police recovered these items, And they then expanded their investigation in the local area, doing house-to-house inquiries to see if they could shed any light on who might be committing these burglaries and armed robberies. One of these houses was, in fact, John Cooper's. And when they went to his house, they were suspicious, and a search of his house would subsequently turn up a mass of stolen property linking John Cooper to the local burglaries and armed robberies. Police searched not only his house, but the houses of his family, and they found a substantial amount of material that had been stolen. He was directly connected to 29 of the burglaries and one armed robbery where he used a sawn-off shotgun and a balaclava to do the hold-up. He was charged, sent for trial, and he was sentenced to 14 years in jail for the burglaries and the robberies. His wife Pat had 10 years of relative peace while John Cooper was incarcerated. Sadly, on the night he was released, his wife Pat passed away. Cooper was found not to have been involved in her death at all. After the post-mortem, her friends said that she died of a massive heart attack. Probably the stress of Cooper being released from prison and coming home was just too much for her to bear. Because of the similarity of the fact that he used a sawn-off shotgun during some of these robberies, police began to think in their own minds, was there a link between Cooper and the two double murders? He was now in jail, so they had time to start looking at forensic evidence and evidence that had been amassed from the two murders and the burglaries to see if there was any link. But all they had was circumstantial evidence. They didn't have a direct forensic link between Cooper and the murders, so they kept on digging. Most of the evidence was stored for years, but eventually a cold case review was opened. And again, police started looking at Cooper. During the time that Cooper was incarcerated for the burglaries and the robberies, police were quite frustrated. They had some 5,000 pieces of physical evidence, but budgets were tight and they couldn't afford to send them all for analysis. So they had to be selective, and each month they used to send off piece by piece of evidence to be looked at by the forensic people in the hope that a golden nugget linking Cooper to the murders would come back. In the meantime, they decided to get closer to John Cooper and they put together an interview team, deciding that he would be brought out of prison for questioning about the murders to see if he would let slip anything connecting him to them. So in June 2008, he was produced to a local police station and was questioned for approximately 4 days. The interview team were carefully briefed. They were not to grill him about the murders. They were to let John Cooper think that he was in control. So they just talked to him about the burglaries, the robberies, the murders, and they invited him to give them information that they might be able to use to come back at him at a later stage, including the wedding ring. But we have to be mindful that Peter Dixon had his wedding ring stolen. They also questioned him about the fact that during his robberies he had used a shotgun. Now, the mention of the shotgun seemed to perturb John Cooper. He said himself that he remembered the judge talking about a shotgun that he had used in one of his robberies, and that was part of his conviction. But when police mentioned that the shotgun was still kept in evidence, this seemed to upset Cooper even more, because he said he thought the judge had ordered it to be destroyed. After his interview days, police sent the shotgun to be forensically examined once again. They wanted to find out why John Cooper was so perturbed about it. In January 2009, Cooper was released from prison after 10 years. Now, at this time, police firmly believed that he was connected to the 2 double murders and the assault of the 5 teenagers. But because they lacked any DNA evidence to connect him to these crimes, they changed tack and started asking the forensic people to look for fibre evidence. Now, in terms of clothing, there's a huge amount of evidence that can be gleaned from fibres which are left at crime scenes. One of the pieces of clothing that had been collected from John Cooper was a pair of shorts. These shorts bore a strong resemblance to shorts worn in a photo fit or drawing of a person seen withdrawing the Dixon's money from a local cash point. The examinations went on, and in April 2009, police finally caught a break. Whilst looking at the shorts for fibres, a small spot of blood was discovered, and this was deemed by the forensic people to be enough to be sent for DNA analysis. A full profile on the spot of blood was done. It was Peter Dixon's blood, there was a 1 in a billion chance that it could be a match with someone else. So it was really strong evidence. And this was when more evidence began to surface. You remember I said that certain items were discarded in a hedge by John Cooper. Well, one of these was a shotgun. There was a screw hole in the shotgun, and the screw that matched this screw hole was found in John Cooper's shed. The shotgun was analysed even further, and it was found that the barrel of the shotgun had been painted black, supposedly by Cooper. The forensic team scrupulously and carefully scraped off the black paint from the barrel, and underneath they found blood evidence. This blood evidence was both on the breech end and on the other end of the barrel. Further examination would determine that again it was Peter Dixon's blood. It would seem that in painting the barrel with black paint, John Cooper had preserved evidence which would subsequently link him with at least 2 of the murders. But police wanted to strengthen their case even more. They wanted to connect him with the description of the man seen using the Dixon's cash card. And to do this, they used evidence which came from quite a remarkable source. In 1989, John Cooper had appeared on an ITV game show called Bullseye. For those of you, again, who are not familiar, it's a game surrounding the game of darts. Police went to the ITV company and asked them if they could provide any evidence in terms of video or recordings from the show. And they found a side profile within the recording of John Cooper, which was an extremely good match to the artist's impression of the man who withdrew money from the cash point. They were left questioning in their own head, why would a man who had committed murder put himself out in front of people on a national TV show? But they thought that John Cooper must have considered himself untouchable. In May 2009, the police pounced. John Cooper was arrested once more. When he was arrested, he wasn't particularly happy about it, and there was a bit of a scuffle between him and police, which was filmed by police. When they searched his car at this time, they found more evidence which pointed to the possibility that he was going to start his crimes again. They found a length of rope, some gloves, and an ordnance survey map of the local Pembrokeshire area. And so the questioning started again, this time by 2 experienced police officers, Detective Sergeant Gareth Rees and Sergeant Louise Harries. They started to try and make connections between Cooper and some of the evidence they had. They showed him the footage from the ITV show and the artist's impression of the man who'd withdrawn the cash, and asked him did he see any similarity. And of course he said he really didn't. They also showed him a photograph of the shorts that they'd obtained from him, and he identified the shorts as his. He was also asked to compare his shorts with the ones in the drawing of the man from the cash point. He said they weren't similar because one pair was short, that was his, and the pair in the drawing were longer. Because of this, police asked the forensic people to have a look at Cooper's shorts again, and they found that they had been shortened. It's very ironic that the shorts were actually shortened by his wife Pat. Unknowingly, in turning up the trousers, she preserved evidence which would link John Cooper to one of the double murders. The forensic scientists then went on to unstitch the shorts to see if there was any evidence within the turned up parts. And it was here that they found DNA evidence which was a match to Julie Dixon, who was the daughter of Peter and Gwenda. The only reason police could think of for this evidence were that the shorts did not originally belong to Cooper. They thought he'd taken them from the Dixon's backpack when he had robbed and murdered them. As things wore on, further evidence came to light. Fibres were found in and on the shorts that linked Cooper to the attack on the 5 teenagers, and fibres were also found in the pocket of the shorts that linked him to the murder of Richard Thomas. When confronted with this evidence, John Cooper still protested his innocence, and at one point even tried to implicate his son in the murders. He did this basically by saying that his son used to take his clothes and wear them all the time. So not only had he given his son a terrible upbringing by perpetually beating him, he was now trying to frame him for murder. But all the evidence had stacked up against John Cooper. He was held in custody until his trial commenced in 2011. Now, some of John Cooper's family did support him during his trial, but it's interesting that his son, Andrew, actually gave evidence to his character for the prosecution. The trial lasted approximately 9 weeks, but at the end of it, the jury found John Cooper guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 4 life sentences with no possibility of parole. He said that in the case of John Cooper, the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment would mean exactly that. In other words, that he would die in prison, and he was handed a whole life order. He did launch an appeal against his conviction, but this was rejected in November 2012. Subsequently, in 2023, he would apply to have his case reviewed. But as far as my research can determine, this didn't go anywhere and he remains incarcerated, hopefully for the rest of his days. But just as I draw this video to a close, I want to point out that there were possible further connections to other crimes of John Cooper which were made by police. And this involved the deaths of 5 other people. In 1989, a 72-year-old widow called Flo Evans died under unexplained circumstances. Now, both Cooper and his wife knew Flo, so police started to look into whether there was any connection between Cooper and Flo's death. Police also started to look into the murders of Harry and Megan Toos. This was a couple who were shot at point-blank range in their home. They were killed in 1993, shot in the head, and their bodies were then dumped in a cowshed under a carpet. The weapon involved appeared to be a shotgun, so again this sparked off questions in police's mind as to whether Cooper was involved. And finally there were the murders of Griff and Patty Thomas. These were again elderly siblings in their 70s, and they were murdered in 1976. Police started once again questioning whether Cooper was involved. As far as I can confirm with my research to date, no firm connection has been made between Cooper and these other murders, but police continue to look into them. But the fact remains that John Cooper now languishes in prison for the rest of his life, and that's where he should stay. Our heartfelt condolences go out to all of the victims of John Cooper, who can, I assume, only take solace in the fact that eventually justice was done. And on that note, I'll ask you to stay curious and stay safe, and thank you for watching.